right, welcome back to another Wheel of Time video. First of all, apologies for the delay between videos. I got really busy and then I got sick. I don't know if you can actually hear it. My voice sounds really, really weird to me. Like, I feel like I'm about 2 octaves lower than I normally am. I don't know. Let me know. And also, let me know if you heard that motorcycle. Always loud traffic. But yeah, I guess I wanted to record a video. I wanted to talk about some Wheel of Time stuff. Also, I've got a new setup, obviously, new location and new setup going on. I'm using scenes and Stream Deck and all of that. So let me know your thoughts on the setup, all this stuff going on as well. Let me know. But I guess with all that out of the way, let's just get into the video.
Let's be nerdy, babe. Let's be nerdy, let's be nerdy. Let's be nerdy, babe. Let's be nerdy, babe. Let's be nerdy, let's be nerdy, babe.
So what I wanted to talk about today is something I just keep hearing people say. I keep hearing the word agenda thrown around. And I've talked about this a bit before. I talked about it in my reaction to the Wheel of Time casting. I talked about it in my video about representation. But there is this assumption that anything that happens in a story that involves people that aren't white, heterosexual men, well, there's obviously an agenda involved in including those aspects. They can't possibly just exist without explanation. And as someone who, for whom none of those labels apply, I find this it's incredibly insulting. Just the idea that the existence of someone like me in any story has to be justified. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. It's dehumanizing. I am apparently so other that you can't tell a story about somebody resembling me without some nefarious purpose. Or not even necessarily nefarious. Even people who approve of representation will sometimes assume that the inclusion of any minority or marginalized group has been done in order to fulfill the ideals of representation. People like me don't just happen in stories. It can't possibly just happen organically. We have to be willfully inserted. The idea that my existence, or the existence of any human who isn't a white, cisgendered, heterosexual male, has to be justified and explained. As someone who has lived for almost my entire life being an extreme minority, like living in central Canada as a black woman, I was the black girl at my school, or living in rural Ontario, same thing, or living in Ireland, rural Ireland, same thing. Right now, I am living in South Korea as a black woman. The whole, but it's unrealistic to have a brown person in that context. It's so unlikely. It pisses me off because I have been the unlikely brown person existing for the majority of my life. If someone made a movie about my life, or not even about me necessarily, but about something adjacent to me, and there was a black person in it, people would be, why is there a black person there? And I would have to go, because I was there. I am an unlikely black person. That is apparently my role in life. Now, this is not to say that I'm opposed to intentional representation. I think that you sometimes have to do things on purpose, because if you don't, people will default to what they are used to, even if what they are used to is nonsense. Like, for example, every show and sitcom that takes place in New York City and has an almost entirely white cast. The first time I went to New York with one of my best friends, one of the first things she said was, "Whoa, TV lied to me. It told me New York was a white city." Anyway, okay, so what am I going to be talking about today, specifically? I'm going to be talking about one specific plot line from the Wheel of Time TV show, and I am going to do my darndest to make this a spoiler-free video, by which I mean I'm going to try my best to not reference the books. So, if you have seen the show, like season 1 of the show, but you haven't read the books, and you don't want to be spoiled, don't worry, I got you. But I am going to be talking about season 1 of the show, so, I will be spoiling that. And those of you who have read the books, I do think this will be interesting for you, too. So, stick around. Don't run away. So, what specifically am I talking about? Well, you've probably seen the thumbnail, so I'm talking about Soirain, the Moiraine, Siuan, Sanche romantic pairing. Now, as I said, I am going to do my best to not give book spoilers, so I am not going to say anything about whether or not this happens in the books. But I do know that I have seen conversations of people online talking about the show, and I am not sure if these people have read the books or not. But I've seen people say that they found this storyline to be pandering, or it was just trying to be trendy and include something queer, or it's the dreaded gay agenda, or it's obviously just trying to copy Game of Thrones and be sexy, or in one particular case, someone just flat out said, "Oh, it's ridiculous." Now, some of these people might just be homophobic, and they don't want to see queer storylines in any of the media they consume, and I don't know what to say to that. Queer people exist in the world. It'd be weird if we were never in the stories, right? But I think what a lot of people are assuming is that writing a romantic relationship between Moiraine and Siuan, whether this is something that was adapted from already existing content in the books, or if it was something invented for the show, people are assuming that it was shoehorned in. And I think these people are missing the point. Having Moiraine and Siuan have a romantic relationship, from what I see, it makes the story better. And I'm going to go through this point by point to show you what I mean. So, okay, let's start with the basics. In the show, when Moiraine and Siuan meet, there is some essential information that their meeting has to convey to us, the viewers, right? And that is that Moiraine and Siuan, they are working together. That is the ultimate function of this scene, to show us that they are working together and have been working together for a very long time in secret. Now, in order to do that, was it necessary that they be in a romantic relationship? No, right? They could just be friends. They could have had this conversation as friends while drinking tea, and we would have been able to get it. But, okay, I'm not a writer, but I think that as a writer, if you can make a scene do more than one thing, it becomes a better scene. And that's where things get interesting. I think that when you are putting a scene together, you would want that scene to not only reveal details about the plot, of course, but to also allow the audience to get to know the characters more. And we have two characters that we're talking about in this scene. We're talking about Moiraine and Siuan. And we've seen Siuan as a young child who had to leave the safety of her home and her beloved father. And we've seen her as a regal Amyrlin. She's dignified and important here. But we have not seen Siuan have a comfortable, casual conversation with a dear friend over tea. So a scene like that would reveal something new to us about her. We have not seen Siuan in that sort of context before. But we have seen Moiraine have a comfortable conversation with a dear friend. Her and Lan, we've seen that a couple of times. So that sort of scene wouldn't reveal anything new to us about Moiraine. So instead, you take that conversation and don't make it a casual conversation over tea. You make it a conversation between two people who are obviously deeply in love with each other. I haven't seen either of these characters in that context before. So that is something new about both of them. That's great. Not only that, though, not only are they in love, but because of their quest, they don't get to see each other very much. So now the scene has not only conveyed that they are working together in secret and have been for a very long time. That's the essential information. Now this scene also tells me something about Moiraine and Siuan as people. I now know how dedicated they both are to their mission. They're willing to sacrifice their own happiness in order to see this mission through. That is who they are as people. They're putting the fate of this mission and ultimately the fate of other people, the fate of the world, above themselves. I now know something more about each of them and their priorities. I know them both better now. And that actually tells me something more about the stakes of their mission. This mission must be super important if they are this in love and they barely get to see each other. So now I'm actually more invested in their mission. And not only that, but because of how much I've seen that they are willing to sacrifice, I really, really want them to succeed. I want their sacrifice, the sacrifice that they chose to make again in this episode. I want their sacrifice to be worth it. And this scene is probably the most vulnerable we ever see Moiraine, with the exception of her final scene where she's crying with Lan in the final episode. She is uncertain and she's questioning herself. Something she doesn't even really do with Lan unless she's drunk by proxy, in that scene where she gets emotional because he drinks. I love that scene, by the way. But because of the level of intimacy that we as an audience can understand between romantic partners, it's a level of intimacy that that can exist between friends, but you do have to establish that level of friendship, for me anyway, to believe it. Like for me personally, and this is entirely subjective, although I guess everything on my channel is subjective, but that was one of my big issues with episode 5, is that I didn't feel that they sold the friendship between Lan and Stepan enough. Friendship levels have to be established, but everyone sort of just intuitively understands the level of intimacy in romantic relationships, so Moiraine is allowed to be completely vulnerable in this scene, and we as an audience can just accept it and take in this new perspective on her. Now, this is just my opinion, of course, as is everything on my channel, but I think that this choice, whether or not this is a choice that RJ made in the books or, you know, if it was something invented for the show, it doesn't matter. I think that this choice to make these two people on a mission in love, it would have worked regardless of the gender of the characters. It would have improved the story. It didn't have to be queer. But because of who the two parties were, we have an Aes Sedai and an Amyrlin. That is what dictated that it was a queer relationship. It was the world that Robert Jordan created. It's not a nefarious agenda. It wasn't even a desire for representation. It was the story. The story dictated that the characters had to be women, and the story then needed them to be in love. That's it. And while we're at it, it also very nicely and neatly puts an end to anyone who is shipping Lan with Moiraine. Like, that's obviously not where the story was intending to go. But without another place for Moiraine to place her affections, there would always be people shipping it. I mean, even if she had been romantically attached to another man, I still think that there would likely have been people shipping it and thinking, oh, Moiraine and Lan are probably endgame or whatever. But making Moraine's romantic attachment a woman, it just sort of neatly ties that up and allows people to let that ship just sort of sail away. So that's all I want to talk about. I think people often get some sort of tunnel vision, or I don't know, they have these weird blinders on whenever anyone who does not conform to the quote-unquote norms, like if a character is not white or straight or cisgendered or male, people jump to strange and insulting conclusions instead of just taking it in as a story and realizing that, you know, people that are not one or all of those four things exist in the real world. So having us in your stories is not weird. It's actually weirder to not have us in any of your stories. And B, there are plenty of times that including these aspects of humanity in a story actually serves the story. In this case, whether this was something written by RJ or by the writer's room at Amazon, the reason for this inclusion, to me, it is so obvious. Anyway, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like my content and you want to support me, I do have a Patreon. It's always linked in the description below. Thank you so much to my patrons, especially recently, for being patient with me. I've been somewhat overwhelmed by stuff that's going on behind the scenes. And then, again, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice. I can, but whatever. I got sick, and it hasn't made things any easier. So I really appreciate your patience with me with getting these videos out. And yeah, with that, I am going to end this here. So please like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.